You are probably not going to believe this, but a Social Security bill has already cleared Congress, and virtually nobody in mainstream media is covering it. When it surfaced in my newsfeed and I went looking for more detailed information and found almost nothing, I knew immediately this was something I needed to bring directly to your attention. Here is why it matters. More than half of current retirees rely on Social Security for at least half of all their monthly living expenses. And the overwhelming majority of people who are still working are counting on Social Security to play a meaningful and important role in their retirement income. Any modification to that system, even one that appears minor on the surface, deserves serious, careful attention. So let us get into it. What the bill actually says. This is House Bill 5284. Here is the actual language pulled directly from the congressional record. It is a bill requiring the Social Security Administration to update the terminology used in its rules, regulations, guidance documents, and related materials. One of the two representatives who introduced this legislation, Congressman Aaron Bean, representing Northeast Florida, had this to say about it. He noted that many Americans claim Social Security early, frequently at 62, accepting a permanently reduced monthly benefit and, on average, thousands of dollars less in total lifetime benefits as a result. That is an important point, and we are going to come back to it. But first, let us walk through the specific terminology changes this congressman and his co-sponsor are actually proposing, because whether the language itself genuinely matters is a question we're thinking through very carefully. The three terminology changes. Change 1, what is currently called the early eligibility age, would be renamed the minimum benefit age. That phrasing is clearly intentional. It immediately signals to anyone reading it that claiming at this point produces a lower payment, not the full one. According to the bill language, this refers to age 62, the earliest point at which someone can begin drawing retirement benefits. Claiming at that age results in a permanent 30% reduction compared to the standard benefit amount. That is factually accurate. Whether renaming it actually changes the behavior of millions of Americans making this decision is a separate question entirely. Change 2, full retirement age, what financial advisors and Social Security professionals typically abbreviate as FRA, would be renamed standard benefit age. This milestone typically falls between 66 and 67, depending on your birth year. It represents the age at which you receive your full, unreduced monthly benefit with no penalty for claiming. Change. 3. Delayed retirement age would be renamed maximum benefit age. At 70, you receive the largest possible monthly Social Security payment. Benefits grow at roughly 8% per year for each year you delay claiming past your standard benefit age, ultimately reaching a maximum of 124% of your full retirement age benefit at age 70. Something that genuinely concerns me about this bill. Before we look at the actual numbers, I want to share something that has been sitting with me since I first encountered this legislation. Terminology shifts and word choices are rarely neutral, especially when they originate from legislators with their own policy agendas. My concern is that this renaming exercise may be quietly laying the groundwork for future changes to the actual ages at which people receive their full benefits, what we currently call the full retirement age. If you change the vocabulary first and get the public comfortable with new terminology, the subsequent conversation about changing the underlying ages themselves becomes considerably easier to frame and considerably easier to sell politically. Keep that thought in the back of your mind as we continue. The full picture of what Social Security pays at each claiming age. Here are the complete numbers laid out clearly. At 62, you receive 70% of your full retirement age benefit. At 63, that rises to 75%. At 64, it reaches 80%. At 67, which is the full retirement age for most people currently working, you receive 100%. And at 70, it maxes out at 124%. According to the Social Security Administration, the average monthly benefit as of January 2025 was just under $2,000. The maximum benefit for someone who retired at full retirement age in 2025 was just over $4,000. The critical flaw in most retirement calculators. Free retirement calculators available online do a reasonable job in many areas, but there is one significant and consequential flaw in how most of them work, and it is worth understanding clearly before you use one to make this decision. Most of these calculators present you with a simple break-even chart. The red line represents taking benefits early at 62. The second line represents waiting until full retirement age. Those two lines typically cross somewhere between age 76 and 78. The basic conclusion the chart delivers is this: if you live past that break-even point, you would have been financially better off waiting to claim. If you do not make it that far, you are better off claiming early. But here is the critical note buried in the corner of that chart that most people completely skip past. That break-even calculation assumes you earn a 0% return on every dollar you receive by claiming early. In other words, it assumes you spend every single cent of every early payment the moment it arrives. The model treats those dollars as if investing them is not even a possibility. What happens if instead you set a meaningful portion of those early payments aside and earn a modest 2% return on that money? The break-even point pushes out to around age 81. At a 4% return, the two lines barely cross at all. At a 5% return, you are looking at a break-even point near age 90, meaning there is almost no practical mathematical difference between claiming early and waiting, assuming you can invest those early payments at that return rate. What a 4% to 5% return actually looks like in the real world. How do you achieve a 4% to 5% return without taking on substantial credit risk? The answer is more accessible than most people realize. United States Treasury securities are currently yielding somewhere between 3.7% and 4.4%, depending on the duration you select. From a pure credit risk standpoint, Treasury bonds represent about as safe an investment as exists in the modern financial system. As long as the federal government continues to function, you will receive your principal and your interest. There are other risks worth understanding, and duration risk being the primary one, meaning that if you lock in a rate and interest rates subsequently rise, the market value of your existing bonds declines. But from a credit quality standpoint, these instruments are among the most reliable available to individual investors. This reframes the entire Social Security timing conversation in a fundamentally important way. The conventional wisdom, wait as long as possible, always, is not nearly as mathematically airtight as most people have been led to believe. When claiming early actually makes sense. Let me walk you through two specific situations where claiming at 62 deserves genuine and serious consideration. First situation: if taking Social Security early would allow you to stop working a few years earlier than you otherwise could, that carries real and meaningful value that does not show up anywhere on a break-even chart. And I want to be transparent here. This is not financial advice because I do not know your personal circumstances. But your early retirement years tend to be your healthiest and most physically active. The ability to actually enjoy that time is worth something that pure mathematics cannot fully capture. I will be honest, I fall into this category myself in a personal sense. The men in my family have a well-documented pattern of serious heart issues. It is not unusual for my uncles and cousins to experience significant health problems or pass away before or shortly after 60. If claiming Social Security early made it possible to leave the workforce sooner and spend more quality time doing the things I value most, that would weigh very heavily in my own personal decision. Second situation: if you are disciplined enough to genuinely set aside those early payments rather than spending them, and if you are confident you can generate a reasonable return on that money through something like Treasury securities, then the mathematical case for waiting becomes substantially weaker than most conventional retirement advice suggests. When waiting is clearly the right decision. On the other hand, there is one group of people I believe should think with great care and considerable caution before claiming early. That group is people with strong family longevity. If your parents and grandparents routinely lived well into their late 80s and into their 90s, Social Security may represent the only inflation-protected, guaranteed income stream you will ever have access to in retirement. It does not depend on market performance. It does not depend on a company remaining solvent. It adjusts for inflation every year through the cost of living adjustment, and it keeps paying as long as you are alive. Regardless of what the stock market does or what happens in the broader economy, for people who are likely to live a very long time, maximizing that monthly payment by waiting as long as possible functions almost like a form of longevity insurance. It is protection against one of the most serious financial risks in retirement, the risk of outliving all of your other assets. When your investment portfolio is exhausted and your savings are gone, Social Security is still there. For that group, the decision to claim early is one that deserves extreme caution. Why the terminology in this bill actually matters, and why it is not a trivial concern. Let us return to why the language in House Bill 5284 deserves ongoing attention, because I do not believe this is a minor housekeeping exercise, regardless of how it is being presented. The full retirement age was set at 65 for decades. It was then gradually raised to 67 through legislation. The argument used at the time, and the argument that will almost certainly be deployed again at some point in the future, is that Americans are living longer, and therefore the retirement system needs to adjust accordingly to remain sustainable. If the groundwork is being laid right now to shift our collective language from full retirement age to standard benefit age, future legislation proposing to move that age from 67 to 68, 69, or even 70 becomes considerably easier to frame and politically palatable to sell to the public. You are not changing the full retirement age. You are simply updating the standard benefit age to reflect modern realities. Same policy outcome, much smoother and more acceptable presentation. What the data actually shows about American health and life expectancy. Here are the numbers that deserve honest discussion. At age 65, approximately 75% of men will live past 76. Women have roughly a 75% probability of reaching 79. For a married couple, there is a 75% chance that at least one partner survives to age 85. These are meaningful statistics that inform the claiming decision. But here is the figure that deserves far more attention and public discussion than it currently receives. The World Health Organization tracks something called healthy life expectancy. Not just how long people live in total, but how many of those years are spent in genuinely good health, free from serious disability or chronic limitation. For Americans at birth, that number is just 66.1 years. That is barely 13 months beyond the current average retirement age. And countries like Japan, Singapore, South Korea, Switzerland, Spain, France, and Israel all significantly outperform the United States on this critically important measure. The retirement trend data makes this picture even more concerning. The share of Americans who are actually retiring is declining across every age group that researchers have studied. Among 55 to 59-year-olds, the retirement rate was nearly 20% in the early 2000s. It has now fallen to approximately 11%, nearly cut in half in just 2 decades. Among 60 to 64-year-olds, the retirement rate dropped from 41% to 32%. Even among 65 to 69-year-olds, retirement rates have slipped from 76% to 70%. Fewer Americans are retiring. Our healthy years are not increasing. And there is a legislative effort now underway to change the terminology surrounding Social Security ages in a way that could make raising those ages considerably more politically palatable at some future point. That is exactly why I made this video. House Bill 5284, viewed in complete isolation, might look like nothing more than a minor administrative cleanup, a simple update to the language used in government documents. In full context, Given what we know about the trajectory of Social Security policy debates, the pressure on the trust fund, and the decades-long effort to gradually push retirement ages higher, it looks like something worth watching very closely indeed. The bill on its own is not the story. The direction it is pointing is. I will link to a related video on why waiting until 65 to retire could actually be a costly mistake, and I will see you there.